Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Natasha Calder. Natasha's first novel, The Offset, which is co-written with her co-author Emma Szewczak, is being published under the name Calder Szewczak. Natasha, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks very much for having me.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your new novel that you co-wrote with Emma, The Offset, how would you describe The Offset?
I would describe it as a book that's about a dystopian world in which all children at the age of 18 have to carbon offset their own lives by picking one of their parents to die. So it's a fun read for a fun time.
So an uplifting tome.
Yes, exactly. Just what we all need right now.
Yep. Well, do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to co-writing The Offset?
Yes, I do very well, actually. So my co-author, Emma, when we first started discussing the idea that would become The Offset, she had her first child. And in the wake of that, we would both sit late into the night discussing, well, sort of, she was grappling with what she'd done, bringing a young person, a young brand new person into a world that we're facing now that's dealing with climate crisis, what the world was going to look like in the future for her child. And we were speaking a lot about that from our two different perspectives, her from having had a kid and myself from the perspective of having decided to never have children. And in the course of those discussions, we sort of slowly arrived at the idea of the dystopian world of The Offset and the idea of strict population control. And then we took it from there.
And I'm curious about what was your initial writing journey that led you to writing and collaborating on The Offset? And as you mentioned before we started recording today, you have a solo novel that was just accepted as well. But can you tell us a little bit about what got you started writing?
Yeah, do you mean sort of setting out to write at all? Or do you mean specifically?
Kind of what your writing journey was that led you, that's where it started, and then what led you up to collaborating with your co-author.
Well, I suppose, like a lot of people, I'd been writing in my spare time. I think a lot of people who are engaged readers do at some point try to write, and I'd been doing that on and off for a little while. In 2018, I got accepted and attended a Arian West Writers Workshop in Seattle, which had a big impact on me, both in exposing me to a wonderful selection of writers and readers, understanding the process a lot more, and also giving me a little bit of validation in terms of, I was accepted for this and it was very competitive. Maybe I can do it. At the same time, Emma and I had been having all these discussions. We'd, for our own enjoyment, collaborated on some very light-hearted projects between ourselves. And then we started... Emma has also written various things in the past as well. So we were speaking in the context of a very safe space, I suppose. And we, in that context, started talking, and it seemed quite natural that we would then write together.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit more about Clarion West? How was that experience for you, and how did it work?
Oh, it was amazing. It was completely wild as well, more intense than anything else I've ever done, because it's, for any of your listeners who don't necessarily know, it's a 6-week workshop, and there, in my year, there were 18 of us who were accepted and attended. This was back when it was still able to happen in person. I think they're just getting back around to doing in-person workshops again. And every week, every single person would write a short story, and that would get critiqued. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of reading, a lot of writing. And it is specifically for genre writing as well. So science fiction, fantasy, and horror. There were some incredible writers there at the workshop. We had some fantastic. So every week, as well, you also get a different instructor, novelists and editors. And it was very structured, very intense. I don't remember sleeping much at all. But the people in my cohort were absolutely fantastic. So was everyone else on the administration side. And yeah, it was, you come out, I came out of it certainly with a whole greater appreciation of how stories work. It was a while before I was able to enact any of that. Definitely sort of the reading ability advanced ahead of the writing ability, but it was unbelievable, really.
That's great. Well, can you describe your collaboration process when you two were working on the offset? Did you alternate writing scenes or chapters, or did you plot together? Can you tell us a little bit about how that process worked?
Yeah, it ended up being quite organic, and as the nature of books, they often do change shape whilst they're being written. So our premise has also changed alongside that. But we didn't specifically set out one person write this, one person write that. At the base of it were sort of continued discussions. We'd meet every week and discuss where we'd got to so far, where we wanted to go next. And then we would do a bit of writing separately and then pass it over in the course of edits and change it so much that it eventually becomes very hard to even point to an individual sentence and say, oh, yes, I wrote that and Emma wrote this. So in that way, we didn't really have a blueprint to follow when it came to co-writing because there's not much out there about it. So we just sort of came up with our own way, which is also very hard then to pin down into, oh, yes, we did these 5 things and that's how all collaborations should work. It was sort of unique to us and the project that we were doing at the time. And I'm sure we'll continue to develop as we continue to write together.
That's great. And as I mentioned earlier, you mentioned to me that you've had a solo novel accepted as well that will come out in the next year and a half. I'm just curious, are you two planning on collaborating on other novels as well?
Oh, absolutely. We certainly, there are a lot of questions left open by the offset. We'd always plan for that to be part of a series. We have some ideas for a sequel, but we haven't yet started to write yet. And we share a lot of, we come from very different backgrounds, but we share a lot of interests. So I'm sure from that we will be working together on other projects.
That's great. Well, given the offset and your experience with the Clarion West workshop, what writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
One I can say is I would definitely recommend working with a friend. As Emma and I have done, there are some great things about it, partly because already the publishing process, we have, sorry, let me start that again.
Sure.
We have such an idea of the author as a single entity and it's just one person and they create a book and they create a story. But really behind that, there is possibly an agent, definitely an editor, various people who have inputted along the way, beta readers. So if you understand that one of the strengths of starting to work with a friend and collaborate is that you bring in outside expertise very early on, you can definitely strengthen your work. And also then once you're going through the process, you have someone in your corner as well, which is quite nice, to not be going through that alone, to not feel pressured into doing things that you might otherwise want to give into. That can be very useful. So definitely trying to collaborate. You'll certainly learn a lot about the process of writing, not least because you have to find a way to be able to talk about it to the other person. So you can't simply work on instinct alone and that weird communication with yourself where you go, I think this is right. You have to explain to the person you're working with why it's right, why this makes sense, why this other thing doesn't work. And that is very useful as you develop your craft, if that's not too highfalutin.
No. Well, what novels or stories have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Oh, good question. I actually just finished Patricia Lockwood's No One Else Is Talking About This, which I thought was a eye-opening and a really fantastic way to write. I have also been catching up with Juliet E. McKenna has written this series about, I think that the latest one is called Green Man's Challenge, which is a lovely, very enjoyable fantasy series. And what else? I always feel like I'm playing catch up with reading. Basically, there'll be a few other things. I think I finally also caught up with the Sandman series, which was I read a lot of graphic novels as well, and for some reason I've been putting off reading the Sandman series, and annoyingly it is as good as everyone else says.
That's good to know. I still haven't read it.
I can only now recommend it because it is fantastic. You think
great.
When everyone says, "Oh yeah, the Sandman is so brilliant," it doesn't seem possible, but it really is.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your novel?
They can find our joint Twitter account, which is at Calder Szewczak, or also they can find Emma is on Twitter at Emma Szewczak, and that covers us.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Natasha Calder. Natasha's novel, The Offset, which she wrote with Emma Szewczak, that is available now, and it's being published under the name Calder Szewczak. And so go buy a copy. And Natasha, thanks for doing this interview.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Let's say you're dreaming of creating a podcast. Your podcast could have drama. Or it's got the facts. Or it's got laughs. Or it tells a story that you want to go on and on forever. How do you turn your dream podcast into something real that people can listen to on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? Join the Podcast Creative Working Group. Here's the link for info. futurex.network/studio. That's futurex.network/studio. The Podcast Working Group meets once a week to make your creative podcast dreams come true. It's run by a podcast pro, and it's online, so you can join from anywhere in the world. Here's the link again, futurex.network/studio.